you threw me off because I was talking about it, and so I wasn't looking at my sheet of paper. Right. All right, team. We will try again. Okay, we are jumping into Business Book Club for October, Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. Super excited for this conversation. Very excited to be joined by Jeff Bajorek and Josh Roth. Josh actually recommended this book. Before we switch to introductions, gents, a little bit of housekeeping, some very exciting books coming up next. We are moving to Wednesday in November. So just a heads up on that, because I am hosting a live event in Tampa on Tuesday the 7th. So my brain will be broken by the end of the day. So we're going to move one day to November 8th. Song of Significance is Seth Godin's brand new book that he just released. So I think that will be a really interesting read, a first time read for everybody. We're going to end the year with Grit by Angela Duckworth. And then we are starting 2024 with 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. Has anybody read that already?
Most of it.
Yeah, I read it like ages ago and then signed up for Tim's newsletter, which is like one of the very few newsletters that I read. And shortly I am going to drop the set of recommendations that I have for 2024 books in the Slack. I've just kind of been compiling them from what everybody else has sent, and we will come up with a final list soon. But I am genuinely struggling with BIPOC authors. Like almost everybody's recommendation was white dudes. Not shocking. If it wasn't white dudes, it was white women. So if anybody has business books by BIPOC authors, please get those on my radar so we can add them to the short list. And I also very excitingly created an annual membership because everybody was asking me for it last year, particularly for gifting for end of year, and Patreon doesn't allow me to do that. So now we have an annual membership in Gumroad. Okay, let's jump in. Gents, introduce yourselves. Jeff, maybe we'll start with you.
Hi, my name is Jeff Bajorek. I am a consultant. I am a leader of sales teams. I speak, I do sales kickoffs, stuff like that. And my claim to fame is that one time on Twitter or X or whatever you call it, Josh Roth called me a legend. And I hang my hat on that on a regular basis. And I put that on my tombstone one day.
Well, it is very true, Jeff. I'm Josh Roth. I'm a sales leader currently at a MarTech company, Lob. I'm just super excited to be here. I love Predictably Irrational. Jeff has been I call people Twitter friends. Now he's a real life friend. I've actually met in person. Leslie and I have met a few times at SaaStr, and just really looking forward to diving into this book. Fun fact, this was actually the first book that I was 3 months into my inside sales career, making 120 cold calls a day when I first read this book. And fun fact, close rate as an inside sales rep went from about 11 to 12% to about 18% after I finished this book.
Wow.
The deals were small, but still.
Okay, was there one concept more than any of the others that you felt was the game changer, or was it just kind of the strategic approach in general? There was a concept. What was it?
It was the comparisons. If you all remember the real estate agent showing the houses, she would show the colonial, then she'd show another house, then she'd show the colonial with the messed up roof. And then they'd pick that first colonial, which is the one that the agent wanted them to pick. That concept to me opened up the way that you really do everything from share pricing, even to the strategy of how you present pricing. It's actually informed a lot of the way that I currently lead right now and have different aspects of like leading into price and ultimately value. But that has long been one of my favorite, I call it non-sales sales concepts.
Ooh, I love it. And before I hit record, we were talking about the value of being exposed to non-sales sales concepts, business concepts, but that have applicability in our day-to-day jobs. I recently posted about 3 of my favorite aha moments of the book, and talking about how bad we are at comparison was one of them. The other two were the siren song of free and the cost of blending social norms and market norms. But why don't we start with comparison, since you teed us up so nicely? And it's interesting because when I first started reading that chapter, my brain went to anchor pricing, which is a concept we talk about a lot when setting pricing in SaaS. Dan calls it the decoy effect, and then shares that really helpful analogy about house hunting. So I'd be curious to hear if any of you have made any recent purchases where you compared multiple options, and did knowing about the decoy effect help you make better comparisons or help you decide what the best option was?
I made mine a couple of years ago from that standpoint. And I took the comparison thing in another direction. So I'm interested to maybe go there in a couple of minutes, but from a pricing standpoint, I think, and there's so many ways I can take it from a pricing standpoint too. With everything being more expensive over the last 18 months, if you got used to not paying attention how much a gallon of milk costs or a dozen eggs at the store or something like that, and then because this is the food I need, and whatever, it's going to fluctuate a little bit, and you bring it home and all of a sudden the grocery bills are getting larger and you don't quite understand why. But then you go and you try to send one of your kids around the block to the store to pick something up and wonder if you've given them enough money, right? I mean, there's kind of a an interesting play there from a standpoint of anchoring. Like, a gallon of milk has always been this much, and now all of a sudden that's not enough. So there's some sticker shock that comes around there. But I live in Detroit. I have friends and family that work at just about every major automobile manufacturer there is. So I get preferred pricing just about anywhere I want to go, at least the domestic ones. But I remember, and my wife's been dealing with this too, we've leased cars from a certain domestic manufacturer, and I don't need to mention the name because it wouldn't be fair to Ford, but we were, really unhappy with some of the quality that we got. And I start looking at the sticker price and I'm like, wait a second, the MSRP on this vehicle is not significantly different from some of the nicer, more prestigious, more foreign vehicles that are coming around here. And I've driven those before and they don't have these kinds of options. Why am I accepting this? Right. And so then COVID came and all of a sudden there weren't any cars because we had chip shortages and everything. And then those rebates and those sales that they give, us around here, all of a sudden didn't exist. And I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to pay $50,000 for this car, or if I'm going to lease a $50,000 car from this manufacturer versus another one, and there's no rebates or incentives to make me think otherwise, then all of a sudden, here's where that price is. Well, I'm just going to go in a different direction. So I bought a different car because I finally had, in some ways, the anchors removed because these, the domestic automobiles were not significantly less expensive, and I felt like I was getting less quality. But you have it in your mind that, okay, if this is what mediocrity costs, and it's actually a lot more than I think, well, now I can look at something a little nicer and pursue that. And that was what it took me to get over the hump of, growing up in Detroit, my dad was a UAW electrician, worked for General Motors. My mom worked for a supplier. My uncles worked for Ford. It was hard for me not to buy an American car, not to lease an American car, but it was that anchor of, in this case, mediocrity, when I realized I could step up and it wouldn't be a big deal.
Yeah, like the comparison was historical pricing.
Yes.
Historical expectations.
You get frustrated enough, you'll start to look at the details. And that's what I did. It wasn't even a choice before.
That's interesting. Yeah, I did not think about it from that perspective. I immediately thought about it from the perspective of vacations, of like scheduling holiday time, because you have this like 2 weeks, and that's sort of the static there for me because I work for myself, and prior to that I worked for European companies. So like you have this 2 weeks. And when I think about where I'm going to go on holiday, I will always sort of exclude places that don't justify the 2 weeks, where I'm like, oh, I could go Like I could go to, I don't know, the Bahamas anytime. Like that's not worth a 2-week trip. And so I exclude down, and then my comparisons become only places that are worth a 2-week trip. When like I don't have to take my vacation 2 weeks at a time. That is like something that I have just made up, and I don't have to automatically exclude places because they don't, like, in my head justify the long, because they have the long flight or whatever it is. I could be a 2-week road trip, but I never think of that. I'm like, where is it worth like getting on a long flight to spend a bunch of time at? That's really interesting. So what else were you going to say about comparisons?
Well, I think a lot of times we need to recognize that from a sales standpoint, our prospects don't often have anything to compare to. One of the clients that I'm working with right now is custom software. They literally create magic out of thin air, and it's intangible. You can't see it, feel it, touch it, smell it, taste it, hear it. I mean, and so it's like one of these things where, wait, you can do what? We can do anything. Well, what do you mean anything? I mean, like anything, like use your imagination. And I run into this with AI. I see AI and I see the power of it, and I'm like, I don't have any idea what to use this thing for. But then someone shows me what they did. I'm like, oh, I get it. I can use that to automate these tasks. I can use that to, automate this research. I can use that to come up with some question starters for me from, for prospecting. I can use it to write my podcast show notes, things. Okay, now I'm starting to understand with context what it can do. But without any comparison, we don't have context. And without context, we can't make a decision because there's too many things to compare, or too many decisions, or I guess too many factors that go into the decision that require some sort of comparison, where we are right now, what we're doing right now versus what we could be doing with a little help. And so when you hear the buzz about new technology and all the things that go into that, it's like, all right, well, that sounds really cool, but how do I decide if that's valuable?
But like, given the same task, you don't think that we would be able to compare, like, let's say it's pre-call prep.
Sure.
You don't think that we'd be able to compare then pre-call prep done by an AE on your team versus pre-call prep done by Bard versus chat? Like, you don't think that we are capable of making those three different, because like to Dan's example, it's the 2 houses and then one is like kind of defunct. So then is it like prep done by ourselves versus Bard that's free versus chat that's paid?
No, I'm saying take a step back even further. We have AI. AI can think. Okay, let's just that's what the basically the concept is. How do I want it to think? What do I want it to do? My brain did not go to pre-call prep. My brain went, wow, that's really cool. My brain went to the Terminator, right? It went to robots talking to robots and acting independently, but I didn't have any comparison or any thought or any context for what that would do for me. And then as soon as someone said pre-call prep, I'm like, oh, I get that. Oh, so what are things like pre-call prep? What are repetitive research-based tasks? And once I had pre-call prep, I could go from there. But you just introduce a broad concept for me, and I don't know enough about it. I just know that it's a thing. And I'm like,
yeah, okay, so more like extrapolating. I don't know, Josh, what do you think?
So I'll give a sales related example and then a non-sales related example of a buying example. So the sales related example is at Lob, we're the premium product on the market. So if you want to compare apples to apples, which humans often want to do, they always want to compare A with A. If we get into a cost-based comparison, it is a losing battle for us. Right. We will almost always lose on cost. The flip side is also true. We will also almost always win on value. And so what a lot of our AEs used to do is they would put together these cost analyses because the cost was easy to see. It was visible. I think Jeff called it out. It's tangible. It's easy to find. It's easy to do discovery on, and then it's easy to measure. What is harder to measure is value. What are you actually getting? Because you need to have the periphery to be able to see it, ask the right questions around it, and then your customer needs to have the visibility and understanding to then help you quantify it.
Mm.
And so a value analysis and cost analysis, a lot of people think they're the same. They actually couldn't be any more different.
Yeah.
And so when we are surfacing the two to our end customer, if we are competing on cost and we have a better cost, we are almost always going to win that thing. When it's on value, it is much, much harder, and it's a much tougher needle for us to thread. The flip side is, and I'll give it to you as when I was, buying my house, right? I'm buying a house. I'm a first-time home buyer. This is years ago. And I'm irrational, right? I'm a human, just like Dan talks about. So I go into these negotiations, and the sellers are looking for, whatever it is, we'll call it 500,000 because it's a round number. And in my mind, I lose in two ways. I lose if I don't get the house, and I also lose if I get the house, but if I pay over their asking price. So now the only way for me to win is to find a house and buy it for under the asking price. That is really difficult for me to do. So what happened? I lost my first 6 bids, and I don't think it was close. And eventually someone gave me the advice of like, you are looking at this all wrong. You have to stop for a moment and recognize that you are losing every single time you don't get a house that you want to live in that would make you happier. Think less about what you are paying and who's winning and who's losing, and think more about your happiness and the value it's going to bring to you and how it's going to help you grow and develop in life. So of course, after that, I put in a bid that I think the house is worth based upon my evaluation and my cost analysis. Of course, I did do comparables, and I looked at houses in the area and looked at square footage because that's how humans behave. And I of course, got the house I was looking for, happy ending. But ultimately, a lot of it is just mindset and being able to understand and recognize that, hey, you know what? You are only comparing what you are comparing in your head until you're able to see a wider radius. And that, I think, that's why that concept for me from Dan was so eye-opening when I first read it 10 years ago, but it remains a really important lesson for me today, especially in this market where people are naturally going to be more risk averse. They're going to look to mitigate everything they can, whether it's as their own person, like, Jeff called out, like going to the grocery store, like, did I give my kid enough money to go buy the milk and eggs? They're going to be more risk averse because it's just a more challenging market to navigate, especially with big purchases. And our buyers are very much the same way. They want to find ways to mitigate risk. So they're doing 1-year deals instead of 3-year deals. They're wanting X concessions instead of just signing on the dotted line. CFOs need approval on everything above X instead of, and so that's where I think, for me, understanding the nuance, and Jeff called this out with AI, which is a brilliant, brilliant observation, that you have to be the one to teach AI what you are looking for. You have to put AI in a position for AI to then be successful for you, as opposed to a narrow mindset where comparables are iffy at best.
Mm.
You need to really understand how to make those comparisons, and ultimately, what is that comparison leading to, the strategy behind the comparison. I'll share a really short story. Leslie, you started off talking about like guaranteed rate field and baseball. I started my career working, as an intern for the Cleveland Indians at once Jacobs Field, then it was Progressive Field. Now I don't know what it is. And their baseball operations team had me working on what they called trade comparisons. And what they would have me do is actually write up the similarities between one trade that was made, in 1998 and another trade that was used in 2006, because that would inform them of the type of frameworks to trade baseball players. And it's really interesting to see how those comparisons actually transcend industries. I mean, we're talking about sales and like trading baseball players. Like, it doesn't get all that much more different than that. But at the same time, it's so similar because of the comparison. So I'll get off my soapbox. I love this topic. It's one of my favorites.
It's a good one. And I think that those are the types of comparisons that I found more compelling, or they were quicker to come to mind. It was the difference between, should I buy jacket A and should I buy jacket B, or should I spend that same amount of money buying a course on copywriting?
How do you compare those two? Yeah.
Right, like, I think that type of comparison is so hard for the human brain to do, that it's like, here are all of the possible things that I could spend my time or my money or give my attention to. And it's not, should I watch show A or show B on Netflix? Or like comparing that to meditating, calling my grandma, reading a book. And it's so much easier to be like, oh, well, I'd rather watch this show. This show's better than that show because it's shorter, it has more action, or has this actor I really like, versus, okay, I should spend my attention in this different way, or I should spend my money in this different way. I thought the comparison chapter was amazing. Josh, I know you have to jump soon, so I want to talk about the siren song of free for 2 seconds before you have to jump. And then once you're gone, Jeff and I can start talking smack about you and pick up the conversation. But in terms of examples that he gave, I thought this chapter had some of the most compelling examples, most compelling data. Like maybe like drop it in the chat or show it, like, who's ever made a bad decision just because something was free? Like stood in a line for a free sample, right? Like bought that extra candle because it was free shipping once you hit $35 and spend, me last week. Josh, why do you think humans are so willing to trade our time, which is arguably our most valuable commodity, for the allure of free?
You know, I've always felt that it actually comes back to price is what you pay, value is what you get. And I think humans are naturally a risk-averse species. And so something that is free, that has a hidden cost that you can't quantify, is much more alluring than something that has a significant cost and comes with a high premium on your time. And so I like to use, if anyone's familiar with Clear at the airport, that's my favorite example, because in theory, nobody needs Clear. You're all at the airport. You're all going to get to your gate on time. If you checked in, it is highly unlikely that plane will leave without you, right? But a lot of people are willing to stand in lines that are an hour and a half long, as opposed to getting right in. And for me, at least, I don't want to do that. I'm happy to pay the whatever it is, 20, 30, 60 bucks, because even if I only pick up 1 hour per flight, and even if I only fly a few times per year, I value that time that I am staying, working, or spending with family or whatever, more than I do standing in an airport wishing I was elsewhere. So I'll leave on that note. But I so appreciate all of the time, Jeff, Leslie, Liz, nice to see you. And just appreciate this topic. Super excited to Leslie hear the rest of it, and appreciate being here.
Thanks for the recommendation.
Yeah,
Have a good
absolutely.
afternoon.
Good to see you,
Bye,
Jeff.
See ya.
The funny thing about Clear is that at DTW, the line for Clear is longer than the non-Clear line, and that makes me laugh every time.
I've seen the TSA pre-check a few times, and you're like, or more accurately, this is a very clear comparison to our last topic. At O'Hare, the first class line and the TSA pre-check line are right next to each other. And so often the first class line is longer, but people that have both first class and TSA will go wait in the first class line, when they have to wait longer and keep their shoes on and take their lap. Like, a longer line and it's more of a hassle, but just the prestige of waiting in that line.
That's just it. That does not make sense, but they do it anyway. It's an
It's
additional,
irrational.
it's an appendix to this book. Leslie, you should apply to have this included in future printings. Because I think that's exactly what this book is designed to tackle. And I think what he did with the 13 I think there are 13 chapters in this book, was he gave a lot of texture and a lot of color and a lot of detail to what I do all the time. And I just say, humans.
Yeah, people be people in. It's true. It's true. The free one was just like, I mean, like I said, there were these 3 aha moments where I was like, oh, this is so obvious, but I'm not sure I've heard somebody say it out loud in quite the way that Dan said it in this book. And of course, we've all done that. We all raised our hands when, asked, have we ever made a decision that we wouldn't have made if something wasn't free? And I think Josh made a really good point about like the fear of messing up motivation.
Yep.
Like it is,
Omu.
but if it didn't cost us anything, is it that big of a deal? But it did cost us something. It
Right.
cost us our time. It cost, like there was an expense to it. And the cost was, what else would we be doing with that time or with that money that instead we wasted because of free?
I think about, I don't know how much, I don't like leave the house to buy coffee very often. But when I do, it's typically a large chain, or maybe there's a small place by my house that's really cool, but they don't open till late. So it's typically not my thing. But anyway, I'll pay $4 for a cup of coffee, like in a cup, no cream, no nothing. Like I'm not talking about a coffee drink. I'm talking about just a cup of coffie. And I'll appreciate. And what's that?
It's the Pike's Place roast.
Yeah, not very often, but that, and anyway, whereas my dad and my brothers, they're like, at Speedway, it's 99 cents for any size. So I look at them and I'm like, but you drink garbage coffee on purpose. That doesn't make any sense to me. They look at me and they're like, why would you pay 4 times more for something that is so available elsewhere? And so from a comparison standpoint, from a logic standpoint, from any number of points of view that we can look at this, we have to remember that not everybody shares our values, our comparisons, and those things. And there are things outside of our comprehension because we can't think of any way to compare these things, let alone how someone else would compare them. This book told me so much about expecting the unexpected, having an enormous amount of empathy and curiosity for how someone could think differently than me, and trying to corral all of those expectations into hopefully trying to frame up or help someone frame up how to make a decision. There's so many factors out there. And the more, it's like the experiment about dropping balsamic vinegar, into beer.
That was
I'm
good.
like, yeah, I'll bet that was probably tasty. And I'll bet you liked it until you heard what it was, and then all of a sudden it didn't pass your own say it out loud test.
But then I'm honestly the person that depending on who was looking at me, I would lie about liking it because I wouldn't want to look stupid. Because my identity and my self-worth, I'm in therapy, folks, don't judge me, but like it is so tied up in what other people think of me. That I'd probably be like, no, I loved it with the vinegar. Yeah, give me more. I thought that was really interesting. He had that whole analogy about, I think it was in the comparison chapter, about like coffee at home versus Dunkin' versus Starbucks, and then that Starbucks coffee becomes your new anchor point. So then a $4 coffee doesn't seem that absurd. So why not get the $7.80 one? Because it's not that much more in the context, but you forget that just a year earlier, you would pay, $0 because you would have it at home. There was there was another one that was another example that just like blew my mind, but it's out of my brain now. Courtney, hi, we're talking about the siren song of free and why we are so willing to give up our valuable time and attention. just because something is free. Liz, I see your great example of timeshare
Mhm.
pitches in the comments. That has always been one that really confused me. And Jeff, to your point, like other people's motivations and maybe their lived experiences, maybe their sense of financial security all play into a willingness to, in my opinion, not really be able to enjoy their vacation because they're not spending it doing the things that they would do by choice. They're spending it listening to this timeshare pitch, but that's an entire industry. So
Mhm.
obviously it is predictably irrational that people would repeatedly show up and make that choice. I thought one of the pieces on free that I could not get out of my mind was in the context of data rights. And I mean, in general, I think the fact that we like don't have data rights is just mind-blowingly absurd. But so often people think that something is free, but they are trading their data for it.
Mhm.
And maybe it's just something as small as your email or your phone number, but often it's much more significant data. Like people are filling out, entire surveys of like personal demographic data to get a, whatever it is, like a, free candle, a free dinner. That was more of a statement than a question, but I would love to hear anybody else's thoughts on that because I find it very irrational.
Well, that's because you don't, we go back to, everything kind of comes back to comparison, right? But it's the idea that I don't really have the concept or a grasp for the concept of what I'm really giving up. Because what are you giving up? You give your email address, that email address is going to get sold. It's going to get sold over and over and over and over again. And so now what you did to download some white paper or to get some free sample of, Jocko stuff like Courtney did last week, and you give away your email address, and then all of a sudden you're stuck in your inbox forever with just defending it from everybody else who has access to that. And now it's frustration. It's the fact that you're going to miss emails because they're caught in the fray of all these other things. And you don't think about that 10 steps down the road. You're just like, wait, I really want this thing. And Tim Ferriss said that he was going to give me this thing for free if I just gave him my email address. I'm not suggesting that he's selling your emails, don't get me wrong, but like it's whatever it is, I got to have it now. I don't have to go into my wallet to get this. I just got to type this out. Whatever, I'll delete it later. Well, it's what happens to your email when it's not your own anymore that we don't think about. And that's why we have all these services now that will make disposable emails for you. And
hide my email on my iPhone. You're so right. Like every single thing I sign up for is that. And even like I have like stuff that I give away for free, I ask for an email in exchange, right? So it's free, but I'm asking them to trade their email. Also, anecdotally, about 30% of the emails I get are like very obviously fake.
Yeah.
And that was the other example I was thinking of was the $50 bills that he was giving away for free. And people are so distrustful that they wouldn't take a free $50 bill. But they are, so there's like a disconnect for me because there is some trust that you're giving to somebody and giving them your email, your phone number, like additional data beyond that. But because it's so short term, you can like the consequences are zero in the short term, more significant in the long term. That doesn't compute. But like the risk of being duped in the short term is so much more significant that you're not willing to approach a booth giving away a free $50 bill.
It's weird.
Or it's the Comcast. Weird. Well, I don't think he named I will say Comcast. The example about the free internet service, and then it ended up being like $70 for him. But when he talked to other people who had used that same provider, who had been duped in the same way, they all expected it to have a cost. And I think the average cost they expected was $70, but people that hadn't been duped, they expected the cost on average to be 10. I know, it's so complex.
This stuff can be used against us. I think it's important to know this, because there are people out there whose job it is to know this and use it against us. It's like I read Cialdini's Influence a couple of years ago, and I'm like, okay, I need to read this not so I can use it, but so I know when it's being used against me. And that's, I think, I got a whole soapbox about that stuff. I won't get into it here, but like
I know it's something that's important to you, because we've had this conversation in the context of Chris Voss of the
Same.
Of Never Split the Difference, that like there is a way to use that context, which a lot of it is manipulative. And there's a way to use that to get people to open up so you can serve them. And there's a way to use that to dupe people so they can serve you. And it's a fine line. So speaking of social norms, my third aha moment that I really love was the chapter on mixing market norms, money, and social norms favors. And the analogy that he gave was, if you help a buddy, if you ask a buddy to help you move a couch, just as a favor, it's a yes. If you offer to pay them $500, it's a yes. If you offer to give them the money left in your wallet, which is $5.30, it becomes so deeply offensive, it could ruin the friendship.
Yeah. I have a friend, a colleague, really, not so much a friend, but he's like, look, be expensive or be free.
Yeah.
And there's a different thing that is attached to that. I'm expensive because you value me. I'm going to do this for free because I value you.
Yep.
But anything that is not to an extreme, anything that's in a gray area, which causes you to wonder if it's enough, wonder should it be more, wonder is this actually tied to my worth? If you're I'm gonna offer you $500 to carry a couch for me, like, wait a second, that's gonna take 10 minutes. I just got to move it across the room. Like, are you okay? I mean, yeah, I'll take it, I guess. But if you're offering it, but that's so absurd that I can't be judged for it. If I give it to you, it's free. I can't be judged for that. And so much of, and again, it all goes back to comparison. A lot of times, and not everybody, I'm in therapy too, but a lot of people, it's that comparison of, who am I going to be judged against? And is it going to be fair? I'd rather not be judged. So it's going to be an extreme one way or another. And I don't want the question. I don't want the mental friction. I don't want the emotional component of that. Let's just make it clear cut one way or another. And you would think that free, not to go back to it, but you would think that free would be pretty clear cut. But now it's free with an ulterior motive, and it's just not that clean. But yeah, it's for $5.75 that's left in my wallet. Okay, so what are you paying me for? Are you paying me for my expertise? Are you paying me for my time? Are you paying me for my strength? Wait a second, am I going to take your last $5? I don't want to take your last $5. Like there's so many things that gets compared to. I think it's the emotional labor of all this stuff.
Yeah, it's the worth. That was the number one word that popped into my mind in this chapter, that if you are doing it as a gift to the other person, that is tied to your sense of worth, because you are somebody that is giving and generous. If you are doing it for a fair to beyond fair price point, that speaks to your worth, because they are paying you what you are worth. It is fair, you are valuable. The moment that there's a price point in between those two, you are devalued as a human, because you're no longer generous and you're no longer as valuable as you think you are. Right? And even though the other person thinks that maybe they are doing you a kindness by giving you what they can afford, how it is perceived by you is, oh wow, they either don't think that I'm kind and good enough that I would just do this as a favor, or they deeply devalue my time and they don't think I'm worth anything more than that. And both of those are so offensive and
Mhm.
hurtful. I also thought in this chapter it was particularly interesting that gifts were well received. You could give somebody a gift like a bottle of truffle hot sauce, but had you sent them an Amazon gift card for $15, the same amount as the hot sauce, it would have been like, what the hell, Jeff? I'm using a real example because that's a gift Jeff recently sent me, but I've been like, what the hell? I did that for you as a favor because you're my friend.
Yeah.
Rude. Instead, I was like, oh, I love hot sauce. Did you know I love hot sauce? Like it created a moment of like closeness and intimacy.
Mhm.
Whereas monetizing it, you keeping it as the social norm created that closeness and intimacy. Monetizing it and pivoting to a market norm would have created distance. He did send me Truff. He did. Yeah, he absolutely did. And then to make it even better, Liz, I sent him back a picture of me holding it next to my tray of hot sauces, which there's like 20 in there, including a bottle of Truff. And then I told Jeff how my husband and I got on Truff, which was one of Oprah's favorite things in 2019. And I got it for him for Christmas. And Jeff was like, no shit, that's how I found it too. My wife got it for me for Christmas that same year. I was like, okay, so I guess that is predictable. Not predictable irrationality, just predictable wife behavior, being like, good God, what can I get my husband that he will love? Oprah, show me your ways.
It's the thought that counts though. And that's what that goes to. It's like, okay, it wasn't about you getting the hot sauce. It was like, you know what? I think you're going to like this. If you don't like it, it's novel enough for you to regift, and by all means, go ahead and do that. But it's like, here, you helped me, and I appreciated that, and we bonded over that, and we created a lot of value, and that was great. And then as a token, but money is not a token, right? Money, well, I guess money is a universal token, but
it's not a generous, it's not a gesture. It's not like a thoughtful gesture.
Yeah, it's a transaction, and so for me to send money, it'd be like, here, it's like, it's funny. And just again, the paradox of choice and the friction behind decision making. I have this gift card. It's been on my desk. It's $100 gift card. It's been on my desk for 6 months. I have a friend who was looking for a coach, like a career coach. And she's a physician. And I had just done an event where there was an executive kind of career coach who was a woman. And I referred her, and this woman, my friend, has been getting great help. And this new connection of mine said, hey, sent me this really nice thank you note and put this gift card in it. And I don't know what to spend it on. Now I got to think about where I'm going to spend it. And I got to think about how I'm going to spend it and all that. And if she would have just sent me something else, it would have been quite a nice gesture, even if it was worth less than $100. You know, and now I feel like I'm being ungrateful for the gesture. This is a very nice, and I will find something to spend it on. Probably find something to eat with it. But it's just so interesting and it's the perception of money and how we carry emotional feelings and baggage along with that, versus just something thoughtful like, I thought you might like this.
Like, here's a rye blend, because I've seen you talk about that many times before. Here's something that shows that I pay attention to who you are as a human.
Right.
Not something I felt like I had to send you because you did something nice. And I know we've had this conversation before. We do not have time to get into it now, but people that charge mandatory referral fees if people send business their way, versus people that just send business their way because they know the person that can help them accomplish their goals. And in making that referral, they get to help somebody else lift up their business. And you and I are both on the side of no referral fees, but you see other people out there who are making considerable income. We're talking like 5-6 figures of their income just from charging those referrals. So I don't know. I think it's really interesting. Last point on this chapter that was like, oh, damn, because the book was written in 2010 and I thought it was especially pertinent now, was how bad companies are doing at blending market and social norms.
Yeah.
That for so long, companies actually relied on social norms. We're a family, come in on the weekend because it's the right thing to do, work a little bit late because Jan really needs some help, and be a pal. And then they started stripping away all of our benefits. They started hard policing the hours we worked, and it didn't matter if you stayed late one night, if you were in late the next morning, you were written up. They started shifting away from the social norms that we're all in this together to the market norms, us against them. And now they are now they're screwed and they can't buy it back. They're trying to go back to social norms and they've realized that they can't. So instead they're making up phrases for people that just want to work their 40 hours a week and be gone, calling them lazy, calling them quiet quitters. And I thought that was such an interesting contemporary example of the repercussions of blending market and social norms and getting it wrong.
Yeah, just keep it as stay in the lane, stay in your own lane when you can, right? Is it going to be purely transactional? Like I mentioned before, my dad was an electrician for 20, 30 years, 27 years, 30 years, something like that. When he showed up, he punched in, and when he left, he punched out.
Yeah.
Except every once in a while when he had a friend punch in or out for him because he, whatever, the shit you get away with at work because we're all a little dishonest, right? It was very clear, it was an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. That was the whole thing. But then it was when you're asking for more than that, well, where do you draw the line? Again, okay, well, we all stayed late last night, but you better not be here 5 minutes late tomorrow. We all
Right.
are supposed to be. It's like, well, hold on here, because you didn't pay me for the time. You're going to dock me later. And it's tough. It's really easy for me to say, well, be consistent. But it's another thing too, to have a lot of those things to manage. And especially when you have people, and if you're in a startup, everybody needs to be in startup mode and everybody needs to be, you have to be, there have to be cultural norms, at that point. But then when you get a little bit bigger, and I see companies struggle with this all the time. It's like, well, we always, back in the day, when John was the CEO and whatever. Okay, well, John's not the CEO anymore. He retired 10 years ago. And by the way, when John was here, we had, 50 employees with 4 locations. Now we're a multinational company with 1,000 employees and 27 locations. Like, we're not the same company. We got to stop pretending that we were. And that's a very difficult pill for people to swallow. So I get why the blending thing is
time to switch to market norms. But then to your point, don't hearken back to the times where social norms,
right?
Like, don't guilt people into acting like it is a culture of social norms when it has clearly transitioned to a company and a culture that is relying on market norms to be able to get the cogs of what is a big wheel to operate. Okay, one last topic that I want to make sure we have time to cover today, and that is bad data. I loved this book. The recent revelation that some of Dan's data may be stretched a little bit. I don't think it changes a lot of the concepts in the book. And for some of them, many of them even, he talked about other external research and external examples to support them. But a big thing that came up recently was the prevalence, not just in Dan's research, but in academic studies across the board, that data was being nudged, is what they called it. Nudged meaning sort of extrapolated in the direction that they wanted, or rounded up to this direction, or, participants were giving that head nod, that intonation to tell them what direction to go. And anybody that knows anything about research knows that it needs to be like pretty blind for the outcomes to be repeatable if other people are going to do the study. And so what's happening is that it's come out that they were nudging their data, that a lot of their stuff is not been repeatable. And interestingly, before I read the article that included Dan that Jeremy so kindly sent me, I had a question in our run of show that was, how do you think the results of Dan's experiments might be different if he wasn't interviewing a bunch of young people who either had the smarts or privileges to get into a prestigious university? So I think it's important to call out that there was nudging going on, but I also, independent of that, he picked very specific samples. They were very small sample sizes, and they were people that they were all in one pool. Like, he didn't have diversity of experience or diversity really at all in his sample sizes. So this entire book was really based off of interactions with a bunch of college students, most of whom were white, most of whom were middle class and above. How do you think that the outcomes and findings may have differed with a different pool or broader pool?
My gut tells me not a whole lot different, because he didn't say anything that didn't make sense to me. He didn't say anything that I hadn't experienced, either experienced outright or experienced something similar to it that I could compare it to. So there was nothing that blew me away. It was like, hold on a second. You mean to tell me that what? So I didn't have a hard time believing it, which is why I asked the question at the very beginning, does the data even matter? You know, anecdotally, which is all we ever really go on, because anecdotally, that's where our emotions are tied up. And, you know, the data only matters in the presence of emotion to begin with. So, you know, from a scientific standpoint, this hurts my feelings, you know, as someone who's done research, has published research before, who's like seen what goes into that. The idea that now all the science over the last 20 years has a little bit of a shadow cast over it now, because whether it was him or his colleagues or any of there's enough of this that the Atlantic's on it to say, hey, by the way, this science may not be so scientific, may not be as rigorous. And the thing is, the value of science is tied to its rigor. And so this just erodes the confidence. It's for our little book club discussion, for us thinking about how humans be human in, you know, people be people in, you know, like, okay, it doesn't matter. That's not going to change my impression of this. Like, those are pretty sound theories, and they're tested more rigorously than I ever would. But it's unfortunate. I mean, I don't know. It's not enough for me to say that this guy has built a career, a speaking and authorship career based in an academic career based on lies. But man, it leaves me with a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, the question that I posed before I had read the article. So the entire book, I was thinking, that's an interesting sample size. Like, that lacks rigor. And maybe it's actually the fact that one of my college degrees was a BA in sociology. So it was a lot, like, it was looking at a lot of data in that lens. Maybe I finally am actually using that degree for something. But the lack of rigor didn't ruin the book for me in any way. To your point, though, I looked at the studies he was doing very anecdotally. Like, I didn't look at them as like hard science. I looked at them as like, oh, that's a cute example. That's interesting. But there were a couple of experiments that I do think the answers would be different if he asked other groups of people, like the beer one with the dropper. I think people who are maybe more experienced drinkers, I think people who are older and therefore more self-assured, or more willing to be like, this is shit, and not care about the outcomes, I think that could have changed it. Or maybe people who are more set in their ways, who were like, no, I don't want to redo your weird recipe. Like, I'm just going to go back to my Bud Light. Like, bye, dude. And there were a couple of other examples like that where I could absolutely see if it was somebody who was older for sure, who had more lived experience, maybe who had been duped enough times before, would make different decisions. And I also think because so much of it was tied up in the ways we make financial decisions, that people that were maybe experiencing financial scarcity in a way that probably those students had not because of both their like upbringing where they are, and also had not because like they're college students and they're on campus and things are, you know what I mean? Like, they're not in the thick of it. I think that would have changed some outcomes too.
Well, so we have to be careful too, and this is a statistical discussion, which I am not I am not intelligent enough or learned enough, certainly in statistics, to have the statistical discussion. But because we know that there are counterexamples does not mean that those counterexamples are big enough, statistically speaking, to make an impact on the data. There's also another thing too, to where, you know, you have access to the population that you have access to in your university setting and wherever. And if we didn't make allowances for that, then there's a whole lot of research that wouldn't be published because the bar for rigor is too high. So I can see
to expect research that impacts all of us to be done on a sample that reflects all of us. I'm specifically thinking about the fact that this year was the first time ever that tampon companies tested tampons with blood, not water.
Oh, right. That like,
right?
no,
Like
yes.
and I mean, I know that's a very specific example,
No.
but so much of research and the type of research used in this book is justified by being like, well, we could just pop down the pub to do this with our local students here in the Northeast, versus requiring a level of rigor that may have then also eliminated the discussions that are happening right now about nudging and fraud.
Totally agree. Let's be clear though, like pharmaceutical clinical trial rigor needs to be way up here. Hey, I wonder what people will do if you offer them something for free. I don't think needs to have the same kind of rigor to it.
Not at all.
That's what I mean. So I'm not arguing with you. I just want to be careful that we don't apply the wrong, we don't have the wrong application of rigor for the purpose of the study.
Yeah.
You know, if he's,
there was some misrepresentation by Dan of how definitive the results
good marketing.
That's what irked me. Is that he's like, we went down to the pub and we did 50 people in one group and 50 people in another. And because of that, this is what it means. Versus like, here's one example of how this could play out. And I'm sure a lot of that honestly was his editors more than it was him, that they were like, we got to drive this home. But I thought it was interesting ending book club on a contentious note.
Yeah, they had an N of 100 though, Leslie. They had an N of 100. That's all they needed.
They did, although technically in that one they didn't, because one of the people knew him well and thought that he just hadn't finished his PhD and was on the struggle bus.
That's right.
I'd make it 99 because you'd have to exclude that person. This was a treat, Jeff. Thank you. I love everything we do together always. Thank you to everybody who showed up live and who is watching this on demand. I'm so appreciative of your participation in Business Book Club. Back next month with Song of Significance, Seth Godin's new book. Please remember that is Wednesday of next month, not Tuesday, because Tuesday I will be hosting my first full day content event. And then make sure to check the Slack as we finalize books for 2024. Jeff, thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I just got to say, I mean, we got to have a moment here while this is recording. I mean, can you imagine how much greater this even would have been if Josh could have stayed the entire 30-minute, the entire second half? I mean, everything that he brought, from the recommendation to the insights to the stories, like, I really hope that his boss sees this at some time and recognizes what I don't know if he works for it, what his boss did to us by ripping him out. Yes.
There was a real cost. That meeting wasn't free for us.
No, sure wasn't. Sure wasn't. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, team. Have a great night. Thank you for everything. Bye.